Welcome to another episode of Electable. I'm Deb Chubb, and our podcast is sponsored by Indiana Women's Action Movement. Today, we are just very fortunate to be able to talk about a really great new book that's just about to come out. And I'm here with the author, Daniel Poynter, also the founder of Carbon Neutral Indiana, and now the author of the upcoming book called Carbon Neutral Indiana, A Practical Guide to Climate Optimism, which is just delightful. I mean, we'd all love to have some optimism, uh, you know, when we talk about climate change. And, for many of us who are in the environmental, areas, we often wonder why we're so optimistic, but you can't help it. You just got to keep being optimistic to keep doing this work. And I'm sure Daniel feels that same way. So, Daniel, and you come to this with an interesting journey. So I hope that you can give us a little background about yourself and how how you came to write this book.
Sure. So I think the reason why your audience may want to listen to this discussion is because I want to communicate how we were able to create a book and that has a lot of resonance with conservatives in Indiana. So instead of fighting against them, we figured out a way to have common ground on certain values and to unlock a lot of potential energy that's blocked. So that's kind of the big why. So I'll step back and say, the book is, it's a fun and it's easy to read. It's only an hour or two to read. It's very much like a magazine, but it's a book form. Lots of illustrations, and the meat of the book is 60 true stories, 60 success stories of Hoosiers reducing carbon emissions in many different ways, not just solar power and wind, but lots of different ways. And the book has 16 how-to guides. So if you get inspired by a story, there's a how-to guide that tells you how you can implement it in your neighborhood. There's also a directory of 50 organizations and their contact information that can help you get started. And also there are 20 bills. So if you're interested in the policy realm. So that's kind of the purpose of the book. And how it got started, well, I used to be a software engineer. And in 2019, I took a year off to interview about 300 people working on climate in the Midwest. I took them out for coffee. I did interviews over the phone, and I took notes. And I created a big visual systems map of all the people working on the issue, on environmental issues. And out of that year of research, I created this nonprofit called Carbon Neutral Indiana. And since then, I've interviewed about 600 more people. So I've interviewed almost 1,000 people, and I always take notes when I interview them, and I listen to like, what are their psychological pains? What do they desire? What language do they use? What is their process currently? And out of all this research, I learned that people feel like they want to know, what can I do? I'm not that powerful. I'm just a person. What can I do that can influence my household, my organization, my city? And so that's really the reason why I created this book, is to answer that question. Well, what can I do?
That's great. So yeah, you called me and you talked to me for a long time, and I've never been asked, well, how does it make you feel? I thought that was really interesting. And I know, I actually know that, Jim Poyser does a lot of that kind of work too with young children and Earth Charter. And it's a terrific, if it's, it's just a terrific way to kind of go at this issue instead of just, doom and gloom. Let's talk about how you feel. Let's talk about how you can feel better. That's so
Yeah.
nice. So,
I also wanted to mention, many years ago, I listened to NPR every day, and I got incredibly depressed. And I read Stephen Covey's book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. It sounds cheesy, but it really is a classic. It created the entire field of executive coaching. And one of the key takeaways in that book, everybody should read it. If you feel prideful, like, oh, I'm too good for this book, try to get over that. Read the book. It's amazing. One of the key takeaways is this idea of a circle of influence versus a circle of concern. And the circle of concern is, I'm concerned about nuclear war. I'm concerned about, people starving to death in India, but I don't really have any influence over that. So my circle of influence is things like what books I read, what media I consume, what people I spend time with, what I do with my career. And the more you focus on your circle of influence, you actually feel powerful, and your circle of influence starts to expand. And lo and behold, you actually become much more influential than you thought you could be. So really the book is to instead of looking to Biden to fix all of our problems or getting angry at Trump, the book really brings people back to them as an individual, their family, their neighborhood, their city, their state. And in that order, if you focus on action in that order, you start to feel momentum and confidence, and you realize that you're creative and you can shape the world. But you have to do it in order. You can't go to the big stuff first.
That's interesting. And I mean, and that's kind of a description of your journey, isn't it? I think that's how, I think that's how you came to publish this book. I mean, I know that you came from a totally different industry, but you had this big concern, and you really attacked it, developing these circle of influence and people who are involved in it, and super smart. Maybe that is kind of a systems approach, huh?
Yeah, totally. So I'll tell you another thing people said, what can I do? So the nonprofit I founded, if you're not familiar, Carbon Neutral Indiana, I looked when I was doing all that research, I found out half of the carbon emissions in the country come from 10 states, and one of them is Indiana. I thought, oh my gosh. Then the other thing that I learned was that national climate philanthropy is largely ignoring Indiana. Most of the climate philanthropy is going to the coasts and to blue states. And a back of the napkin, I found out that Indiana is only getting about 5% of the climate philanthropy it should, if that philanthropy was distributed fairly by population. And it's not just because a lot of people think it's because we're a Republican supermajority, but that's not quite the full picture, because our Senator Mike Braun, who's a Republican, even though he's a Republican, he created the bipartisan climate caucus in the Senate. And he said behind closed doors, many Republicans are worried about climate. So there's some potential energy there that's not being unlocked. So when I learned these things, that Indiana is a very carbon intensive and that we're just not getting the philanthropy that is fair, I decided to create a nonprofit that's called a social enterprise. We generate our own money, kind of like Girl Scouts selling cookies. So what we do is we have a 3-step process. We help people measure their carbon footprint over the phone. I've done this for 600 people. It's a 10-minute phone call. And then I invite them to clean up their carbon trash. So I say, okay, Mrs. Smith, you clean up your physical trash already. You pay $30 a month for that. You clean up your sewage. You pay the water company to clean up your sewage. Why don't you clean up your carbon trash? It's like $15 or $20 per person per month. And she says, okay, sign me up. So depending on how big her carbon footprint is, she invests money, and we take that money and we put it into projects that reduce emissions around the world, equivalent to what she creates. And so she's balancing out her emissions, right? So there's about 220 of these members, and we keep a percentage of that as a margin, as a fundraiser, just like Girl Scouts selling cookies. And in that way, we've been able to grow even without the support of the Michael Bloombergs of the world. You're right. And so all those members, they're saying, well, what do I do next, Daniel? I'm already giving $50 a month. So the purpose of this book was to say, I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate. What's next is not to install solar panels necessarily or LED light bulbs. What I want you to do is just educate yourself. The more you educate yourself, I could switch LED light bulbs. That's nice. But if I read a book or I participate in a book discussion, I will become a better person that will have much better ideas than if I don't. So what I'd really like people to do is clean up their carbon trash and then commit to just continuously learning. And so that's really the purpose of this book, is to show people the lay of the land, who are all the organizations working on this issue, and where can you plug in and give your gifts.
Excellent. So, okay, I have to ask, what do you do with the rest of the money that you don't keep? Where does it go?
So the Girl Scouts keep about 60 or 70% of the cookies as a margin. We keep about 40%. And that 40% goes into continuing to market and educate. So driving around the state, teaching at schools and churches, paying for our website, stuff like that.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, so, and I would love it if you could give us some examples from the book.
Yeah, sure. There's, like I said, 60 stories.
Give us a couple of great examples.
So one of my favorites is, have you ever seen those little tiny libraries in people's neighborhoods?
Yeah.
Well, there's a young man in Lafayette. He wondered, if we're in a climate crisis, why didn't I learn about this in school? So what he did was, him and his friends, they built a couple of those tiny libraries around Lafayette, but they're dedicated to climate books. So they're climate themed free tiny libraries. And this is something that anybody could do in Michigan City or Bloomington or Fort Wayne. You could do this in a weekend.
Right.
The books are full of the libraries are full of books about climate. another one, my favorite, it's kind of nerdy, but in processing water and cleaning water like sewage, it produces 3% of carbon emissions in the whole world. 3%. So in Fort Wayne, they actually capture the waste gases, the methane, they burn it and they make electricity. And this has saved them 30% on their electricity bill. They saved $1.2 million over 2 years. So they're literally turning sewage into energy. But it's even cooler than that. They're actually going around to all the restaurants in Fort Wayne and collecting the grease. They take the grease and they dump it in the methane digester to make energy. And it's even cooler than that. Down the road in Anderson, Indiana, there's a Nestle factory where they make like coffee syrups and stuff. They have 3 semi trucks a day of biological waste that they send up to Fort Wayne and dump it in the methane digester to make electricity. So there's another one in Huntington, Indiana. In their downtown core, they have all these beautiful historic buildings that really give character to the town of Huntington. But the problem is, if you own a building like that, it costs more to maintain. It's cheaper to own some boring building in a strip mall that has no character. Those old buildings, they have old roofs that are expensive to maintain. And so these people are really trying to maintain the character, but it's expensive. So what Huntington does is they'll give a small grant, about $5,000, if you need a new roof. And they'll encourage you to get a new roof, because if you don't get a new roof, the water destroys the building and the city has to pay $250,000 to destroy the building, right? And you lose the character of the city. But this little bit of money, they have as a string attached. The string is you have to make your roof white so that it reflects sunlight, so that it reduces your energy costs, right? That's another example. There's one other I'll give quickly is that this is a bit more controversial, but the Department of Energy has been funding billions of dollars into what's called carbon capture and storage. And I interviewed a man named Kevin Ellett. His family has been in Ellittsville for 7 generations. And he was an engineer who worked on Yucca Mountain, where they were hoping to store spent nuclear fuel. Well, what he's doing with his engineering background now is he's working on carbon capture technology, where basically you capture carbon out of the smokestack, you pressurize it into a liquid, and you inject it thousands of feet into a geologic store. And he said that Indiana has enough geologic reservoirs to store hundreds of years of emissions. Those are just a couple stories. There's 60 total.
That's interesting. That one I'm skeptical about, but I just don't maybe know enough, because I know that our legislature passed a bill. I don't know if it was the last session. I think it was the last, not the summer session, but the one before that, that allowed utilities to start investigating these carbon capture. I don't know what you call them. I've known for years. There's been industries who've been injecting their waste in these high pressure, deep injection wells. And I was always curious about them. They're Indiana doesn't oversee them at all. They are permitted by EPA, but there's no, I don't know, I don't think very good monitoring. And I always wondered what happened to that stuff. Like, well, where does it go? And no one could really tell me. They're like, well, we're not really sure.
Well, I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the summer, I hired an industrial engineer, Harini Radhakrishnan from Manila, Philippines. And she and I worked together closely all summer. And we did a ton of research. And so for that particular story in the book, there's no how-to guide. Like, you can't do this yourself. However, instead of a how-to guide, we've identified a couple of resources that all educated people need to read. This is an important technology. Whether we do it or not, we need to know more. And so the book directs people to very good resources about that.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. I mean, that's how I feel about that one. I feel like I don't know enough. So, okay, here's just a random question that popped in my head because I've read some articles about it recently. But there's been this discussion of revisiting nuclear. That nuclear is, it is much safer than burning coal. And according to the report I heard, it was on Freakonomics is where I heard it on NPR, and they said, even safer than hydroelectric utilities. And so any discussion in your book about revisiting nuclear?
Just a little bit. We don't go deep into a story about nuclear. But we actually did interview a couple experts. For example, there's a nuclear expert at the Department of Energy that we got to interview.
Uh-huh.
And our companion website has these video interviews. So in addition to the book, say you're a teacher in high school, if your students are really excited about a particular topic like nuclear, our companion website has a ton of more video interviews.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm so
Yeah.
glad that that you told us about that. That's a great resource. So so I have a couple of questions. So one of the questions though I want to ask about the book is you mentioned 20 bills that are in there. So now are these state level bills that have not passed or are they're still proposed? They're not passed into law?
These are mostly state level bills that have passed the governor's signature. So
Okay.
basically, kind of like when you go on vacation, let's say you go to New Orleans and you stay in your hotel and you come down the hotel, you get the breakfast, and as you're walking out of the hotel, there's a little display that has a bunch of brochures. It's like
Mhm.
fun stuff to do in New Orleans, right? So we wanted to create a book like that. So like if you care about climate, where do you begin? And that's what this book is. It's like who are all the people doing stuff in Indiana? And so part of that is, here are 20 bills that you really need to know about. For example, I forget the gentleman's name. He was upset that he couldn't build solar in his HOA. They didn't allow it. The housing, the group. What does the HOA stand for?
A homeowner association.
Exactly. Okay. So his homeowner association wouldn't allow it. Well, there's a bill that was passed that said, you can actually override your HOA if you do X, Y, and Z. So there's a bunch of bills in there that you should know about just to have a base level of knowledge.
I see. So, okay, good. So now I want to ask you now, kind of, unless there's something else particular you want to say about this book, I would like to know where you're going next. Are you continuing to interview people, continuing your research, and where's your research taking you?
Well, yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say was that when we started interviewing people, we thought we were going to create an online curriculum. So, like 5 minute video modules that environmental grasstops leaders could watch to be educated about the broad ecosystem. We interviewed one person, and they told us that they actually created such an online sustainability class. They got a grant for $80,000. They worked on it full time for 3 months. Guess how many people showed up to the class? $80,000.
I don't know, 10. Oh, geez.
So
Oh.
the grantor spent $16,000 per student for this
Hmm.
online sustainability class. So we thought we were going to do a sustainability class, and out of those interviews, that's why we realized, okay, let's create a book, something that you can actually have on your coffee table. And then we clarified who our audience is. Our audience are full-time environmental, salaried environmental people at Hoosier Environmental Council or Earth Charter or whatever, but also they're volunteers. And then also all of our carbon neutral members, people who are doctors or lawyers, they have a little bit of time, but not much, and they want to contribute intelligently. So
Mhm.
we clarified our audience, and then we clarified our design principles. Our criteria would be whatever we create, we want it to be fun. We want it to be backed by data. So we don't want to just tell people do this thing that's not consequential. We want them to do things that are powerful, but we also want it to be based on stories and narrative, so it's exciting, right? And we wanted it to be action oriented. There's so much money going to more scientific studies and more policy studies, but I went to a climate conference and the tagline was from research to action. And I sat around the lunch table with the conveners of the conference at the end of the conference, and I said, okay, from research to action, what's the action? And they said, well, we're going to do more research. We're going to publish a new journal. And I thought, my God. So one of the design criteria was we've got to inspire action. So the way we're doing that, to answer your question directly, is I've reached out to people, and about 150 people said that they want to participate in a small book discussion. So there's like 20 people from healthcare, 20 people from law and finance, 60 small business owners. And so there's going to be groups of 5 to 10 people coming together for an hour and a half, discussing the book, and then saying, well, what can we do now with this knowledge? And then I'm going to pitch them. I'm going to say, um, what if you don't have to commit, but what if we got together every month for 3 months? What could we accomplish together? And then I'm going to have them brainstorm. For example, the healthcare people, maybe they could create a decarbonizing healthcare working group. So we'll
Mhm.
brainstorm. And then at the end of the brainstorm, we'll say, what would it take for you to commit to that? Just 3 meetings in 3 months. So out of this book, I want to create working groups and learning groups. And also our companion website, people can submit stories and bills and organizations that we forgot, and we can crowdsource edition number 2. So a year or 2 from now, we could create a second book that's full of new stories created by the crowd.
That's excellent. So I was one of the founding members of our sustainability commission here in Michigan City, and I was very excited about the tools that were available through the Indiana University Institute of Climate Resilience, something, something, something. And so that's really great. And I know that you had mentioned to me before that part of your plan was to get this book into the hands of municipalities and sustainability commissions. Is that still happening?
Yeah, we raised $30,000 from about 49 people. And with that money, we're printing 3,000 copies of the book, and we're shipping it to, I'm going to name some categories. Here's who we're going to ship the book to. Every elected official at the city, county, and state level. All of IBJ's 40 under 40 influential people for the past 3 years. They have a new list of the most influential 250. We're sending it to all of them. Hundreds of family foundations. So when they're going to give to climate, I want them to look at this book and figure out who is the best use of the money. Every school superintendent, every public library, Eagle Scouts, Girl Scouts, and all those tiny free libraries throughout the state. So we're going to try to send this book to all the civically engaged people in Indiana.
That's excellent. So yeah, and I hope this will be really a great addition. I know, my experience on the Sustainability Commission was, it was really great what they did down there at IU. They would, you write up a little application, you'd get a grant, and we found some matching money, and so they brought an intern up who did the a CO2 inventory for our city, and then we did something, and that's what reminded me was that we had these kind of monthly meetings with all of the other sustainability commissions, in the state. And we would do, like you say, have these kind of, roundtables where we're discussing ideas and actions. And because the next step after that inventory was to develop your action plan. So, it was very complex. I mean, and it really did in that way as a city sustainability commission really tried to take big chunks of carbon, out of the air. And it was difficult. It wasn't, and I think ended up, for many small cities at least, just not happening because it was too ambitious to really, figure out how you could reduce the number of trucks on the road in your, in your city. Things like that were, it was just maybe too much. And so I really look forward to your book and, having ideas that are really practical and really anyone can do and anyone can move forward with. So that's great. And so I like your plan of really looking forward to another edition with new ideas. I think that's such a great plan. And how else are you doing? Because I'm just really again really kind of impressed with this your interview process that you did with people and what else are you taking from that? Do you try to say measure people's feelings towards climate change and climate action, or what all are you doing with all of that? Because I think that's really valuable information.
Well, when you're creating a lot of environmental nonprofits, they want to be sustainable, right? They want environmental sustainability, but they usually don't think about financial sustainability. And if your organization is not financially sustainable, you're doomed. And the lowest level on the rung of financial sustainability is being on a gerbil wheel and chasing grants. I mean, that is kind of financially sustainable, but it sucks because you spend as much time chasing grants as you do doing the thing, right? So the next level up, I think, is to create a social enterprise that sells something. You got to sell something, a product or service that people actually want. You've got to spend a lot of time in the marketplace listening to what do they want. And so those 900 or 1,000 conversations, finding out what keeps people up at night, what are they frustrated about with other nonprofits and stuff like that. And so all that, I would encourage everybody to, whenever you have conversations, to jot down a couple, whatever you learn from the person, what's their occupation, what keeps them up at night, what do they really want, what's their heart's desire, what's preventing them from getting that. And if you just keep collecting notes, over the course of years, you're going to have a gold mine and you can create products and services that you're giving people what they want and they're willing to pay you for it. And then your climate action can be financially sustainable
on its own. Well, that's terrific. And so, okay, so tell us, like how we can get the book. How does that work? How do you get your hands on this book?
So it's just carbonneutralindiana.org/book. And
Okay,
we're taping this on October 13th. They should be out of the printers by August or October 17th. So I should be shipping them next week. They're
great.
available. People in colleges will be using them for the classrooms. Some high school teachers will be using it for their classrooms. But one thing I forgot to mention before we end the interview, I'm really, really proud of this. I spent a lot of time getting advanced praise for the book from leading conservatives. So Mitch Daniels, Secretary of Commerce, Mickey Maurer, him and his brother started the National Bank of Indianapolis. He used to run the Indianapolis Business Journal. Mickey Maurer, an amazing individual, he wrote advanced praise for the book. Greg Ballard, Republican of Indianapolis, he's not an ideologue. He's very pragmatic. He brought those electric blue cars to Indianapolis. He wrote advanced praise. So we got a ton of conservatives. It would be easy to get Democrats like Bill McKibben. We have Bill McKibben having praise on the book, but I didn't want to fill the book with a bunch of Democrats because everybody already knows that they like the idea. So we have a ton of Republicans too. And so I think this will it'll be a huge cannonball in the pool, like a kid jumping into the pool. When we mail this out, I hope that it's designed in a way that it just electrifies the entire state, you know?
So, have you worked with Republicans in Indiana, in the legislature, to get climate action bills passed? And so, who are the great Republican legislators in Indiana who are working toward that?
Oh, well, I would say all of them are potential. I met with Senator Todd Young this week in a small group. I've been invited to Mike Braun's home. And like I said, Mike Braun said behind closed doors, most Republicans are worried about climate.
And why is it only behind closed doors?
Well, I go into this in the preface to my book, but it's the way that the climate movement conducts itself and communicates. There's something lost in translation. And without going deeper into that, we don't have time, but I would recommend people go look up on YouTube. A moral psychologist named Jonathan Haidt gave a TED talk a few years ago where he describes the psychology of liberals and the psychology of conservatives and how they can communicate more effectively with one another. That's one piece. The other piece is that the conservatives, they're not just worrying about climate. They're also worrying, like Dick Lugar, worried about nuclear disarmament. They're worrying about China. Are we going to be powerful in 2100, or will China be dictating the global economy? They worry about opiates. A million people have died from opiates. A million people have not died from climate that I'm aware of. Right. So they're worried about other things. It's not just climate. So when people talk to them, we have to figure out a way to communicate in a bigger package. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Oh, that's great. Wow. Well, what interesting work you are doing. This is really great. Okay, so we go to carbonneutralindiana.org/book
exactly
to order the book. Okay. And then how do people access the other resource that you mentioned, the videos?
That's on our website. That's on our website too.
Okay. Okay, so that's on the website too, and that's just anybody can access that.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. All right, terrific. Okay, well, we are almost out of time. This is really interesting. You are such an interesting person, Daniel, and you have such a great story. I know when I talked to you before, I was just really impressed with your journey as well. And you're taking such an interesting approach to climate change. This is really terrific. I mean, this is what we need, more different, interesting approaches to address climate change. I think we know that so many of the approaches are not working so far. So we need to keep trying new things.
What's the one thing in this discussion that you want to pull out that you encourage me to continue doing that is different and maybe more effective? What's the one thing?
Well, I mean, I have to say that being able to help people work in a bipartisan fashion is, that's really just at the heart of what, the problem, with climate change. It's been just owned by Democrats and eschewed by Republicans, at least out when you're not behind closed doors. So so I think the most important thing that you're doing is really encouraging people and finding ways to bring, Democrats and Republicans together on this, extremely urgent issue, where we really do need action, and where partisan politics, I mean, could, be the ruin of our planet. So I think that is really the most important thing, for you, that you've done well already, and seem to have a good, you have good inroads on that issue. And I think you could really take that much further, and do more to help people, come together across party lines, to talk about and resolve a lot of climate issues.
Thank you for pulling that piece out, and thank you for the opportunity to share this with your audience.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was very, very interesting. So, and I look forward to getting my hands on the book. So, I hope that you'll, offer one to sustainability commissions, in, various cities, because those are the people within municipalities who are eager to take action. And like I said, there's a lot of great other tools out there, but some of them are just really difficult. And, it's a lot, particularly for smaller cities, to wrap your head around some of these, bigger projects. And this could be something that could be an operating manual, for municipal sustainability commissions. Oh, I'm not sure how many there are. Do you know how many there are?
I would say maybe like 5 to 10,
Oh, oh
maybe
well.
15. Could
Okay,
could we could we end the conversation with a quote?
absolutely. You go right ahead.
So so this is a good way to end the conversation. This is how the book begins, with a quote by Warren Buffett. He says, "Throughout my lifetime, politicians and pundits have constantly moaned about terrifying problems facing America. The prophets of doom have overlooked the all-important factor that is certain. Human potential is far from exhausted, and the American system for unleashing that potential, a system that has worked wonders for over 2 centuries despite frequent interruptions for recessions and even a civil war, remains alive and effective." Warren Buffett.
Excellent. Wow, that is, yeah, yeah, superb. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. This has been really great chatting with you. And, again, I look really forward to, to getting my hands on that book, and seeing what you do, after this.
Thank you.